The dense, untouched wilderness of the Kalenai Wildlife Sanctuary stretched as far as the eye could see. The towering trees loomed like ancient sentinels, their thick canopies casting shadows on the forest floor. There were few who dared to venture into this remote expanse, and even fewer who knew its true secrets. The land had a rhythm all its own, a pulse that those who walked its paths could feel deep in their bones. Arden, a solitary biologist with a fascination for the wild, had spent most of his life studying the intricacies of nature. But the Kalenai Sanctuary was different. There were no clear trails here, no easy paths for exploration. The forest had kept its secrets hidden, and Arden had spent years trying to understand why. This was a place that seemed to have its own rules. A place where the air felt heavier, where the earth seemed to breathe in time with the wind. It was late afternoon when he arrived at the edge of the sanctuary, the familiar hum of the wilderness stirring in the background. Arden's senses were attuned to the subtle shifts in his environment, the rustling of leaves in the wind, the distant call of an eagle soaring overhead, and the sudden stillness as the temperature dropped. He set up camp at the base of an ancient oak, its gnarled roots snaking deep into the earth. The silence of the forest was palpable, broken only by the sounds of animals moving in the underbrush. For days, Arden had been tracking signs of the elusive lion, a creature spoken of only in whispers by the few who lived near the sanctuary. It was said that the lion had once been a guardian of these woods, immense and ancient, a creature beyond comprehension, and that its presence was tied to the very heartbeat of the forest. No one had seen the lion in over a decade, and most believed it had long since vanished. But Arden, obsessed with the stories and the undeniable marks left behind, refused to let go of the idea. There was something in the forest that called to him, and he was determined to find it. The first night passed in eerie silence. Arden slept little, his senses sharp as he lay beneath the canopy, listening to the distant calls of owls and the occasional rustle of unseen creatures moving through the underbrush. But by the second night, things began to change. The forest was still, yet the air felt charged, heavy with an unspoken presence. Arden sat by the campfire, its flickering light casting long shadows against the surrounding trees. His eyes darted to every movement. The faintest sway of a branch, the soft crunch of leaves beneath paws. Then he heard it. A low growl, deep and rumbling, coming from somewhere within the dense undergrowth. His pulse quickened. He had heard wolves in these woods, but this was different. This was the growl of something far more powerful, something ancient. The growl echoed again, louder this time, closer. Arden's breath caught in his throat. He stood up cautiously, his instincts screaming at him to run, but he didn't move. The animal, whatever it was, had not revealed itself yet, and Arden's curiosity overpowered his fear. He crouched low, his heart hammering in his chest as he strained to hear the next sound. There was no doubt now it was a lion. But this wasn't just any lion. Arden had studied lions for years, both in the wild and in captivity. But the growl he heard now was unlike anything he had encountered. It vibrated through the very ground, resonating in his bones. The next few moments stretched out in slow motion. The growl gave way to a sudden silence, one that seemed to pull everything into itself, leaving Arden suspended in a world without sound. The air around him thickened, a strange weight pressing on his chest, as if the forest itself was holding its breath. And then, from the shadows, it emerged. The lion, majestic and enormous, stepped from the darkness into the firelight. Its golden mane shimmered, almost ethereal, as though the forest's very essence had woven itself into its fur. Its eyes, glowing faintly in the dark, locked onto Arden. The intensity of its gaze was overwhelming, as though the lion could see into the very depths of his soul. Arden stood frozen, unable to move or speak. The lion's massive form loomed before him, its presence both awe-inspiring and terrifying. It was as though the creature embodied the wild itself, ancient, untamed, and unknowable. Arden's pulse quickened. He had heard stories of a lion that had protected this forest, but he had never truly believed them. Not until now. The lion watched him for what felt like an eternity, the silence growing heavier. Arden's breath was shallow, his body trembling from the intensity of the encounter. He had studied lions, but never like this. This was no ordinary animal. This was something else. Something far more powerful, far more significant than he had ever imagined. Suddenly, without a sound, the lion turned and began to walk deeper into the forest. Arden, compelled by something he couldn't explain, followed. He moved quietly, careful not to disturb the natural rhythm of the woods, his senses heightened with every step. The deeper they went, the thicker the forest grew. The trees were ancient, their trunks wide and gnarled, their branches twisting like the fingers of time itself. The path they walked on seemed to disappear, swallowed by the earth as if the forest was gradually reclaiming the land. The air was thick with the scent of moss, wet earth, and decay. Every so often, Arden caught glimpses of movement in the shadows, but nothing was ever there when he turned to look. After what felt like hours, the lion stopped at the base of an enormous stone circle, hidden deep within the heart of the sanctuary. The stones were covered in moss, weathered and ancient, and their presence filled Arden with a sense of awe. The lion turned and looked back at him, its gaze filled with something ancient, something knowing. Arden stepped forward, drawn by an invisible force, his heart pounding in his chest. He had no idea what he was about to discover, but he knew this was no coincidence. This was the place he had been searching for. And then, with a deafening crack, the ground beneath him shook. Arden stumbled back, falling to his knees as the forest itself seemed to groan. The stones shifted, their surfaces shifting and moving as though alive. The lion let out a low, rumbling growl, its head thrown back as if calling to something beyond the realm of understanding. The ground cracked open, and from the depths of the earth, an ancient roar echoed. The lion's eyes gleamed with recognition. Arden's mind raced, but the sudden realization hit him with the force of a freight train. This was not just any lion. This was the last of an ancient bloodline, the guardian of the forest, the protector of its secrets. And now, Arden had awakened something far more powerful than he could have ever imagined. The forest shifted again, its heartbeat echoing in the stones, in the very ground beneath him. Arden felt the pulse deep in his chest, and it was then that he understood. The lion was not only a protector, but it had been waiting for someone to take up its mantle, to carry on the legacy of guardianship. With the earth still trembling beneath his feet, the lion turned once more, its eyes filled with an almost mournful wisdom. Arden, now standing, knew his path was clear. The forest had chosen him. The ground beneath Arden's feet still trembled, and the air felt charged with a strange, magnetic pull. The lion's presence, majestic and ancient, seemed to envelop the forest, making every leaf, every branch, every crack in the earth feel alive. Arden's breath caught in his throat as the lion turned to face him, its eyes glowing with a light that seemed to come from the very heart of the earth itself. For a moment, Arden was paralyzed with fear and wonder. How could this be? He had come here to study animals, to understand their behavior, and yet nothing in his training had prepared him for what stood before him now. The lion was not just a creature of flesh and bone, it was something else, something far older and more powerful. It was a force of nature itself, tied to the land, its spirit woven into the very fabric of the sanctuary. As if sensing his confusion, the lion let out a low rumble, a sound that vibrated through the ground and into Arden's chest. It was not a threat, but a command, a beckoning to follow. Arden, though shaken, knew he had no choice but to obey. Something inside him, a primal instinct that he couldn't ignore, urged him to move forward. With cautious steps, he followed the lion as it moved deeper into the heart of the sanctuary. The forest grew denser, the trees closer together, their towering forms like watchful guardians. The sounds of the wilderness had quieted, replaced by a thick silence that seemed to hang in the air like a veil. The lion moved with an elegance and grace that belied its massive size. It was as if the very earth bent around it, yielding to its ancient power. Arden's mind raced, but the fear that had once gripped him began to fade, replaced by a sense of reverence. This was not a place of danger. It was a place of profound significance. He had stumbled upon something sacred, something that had been hidden for centuries. Finally, after what seemed like hours, they arrived at a clearing. The trees parted to reveal a small pool of water, its surface still and reflective like a mirror. At the center of the pool stood a stone monument, weathered by time but still standing tall. The lion stopped at the edge of the water and turned to face Arden, its gaze steady and unblinking. Arden approached cautiously, his eyes drawn to the monument. It was covered in carvings, ancient symbols that seemed to pulse with an energy he couldn't quite understand. Some of the symbols looked like animals, others like abstract shapes, but all of them radiated a sense of power. The stone itself seemed to hum with life, as if it were more than just rock. As Arden stood there, studying the carvings, he noticed something strange. At the base of the monument, hidden beneath the overgrown moss and vines, was a series of footprints, large, deep, and unmistakably feline. His heart skipped a beat as he realized the truth. The lion he had been following was not just a protector, it was a descendant of the creature that had once stood here, guarding this sacred site. But what had happened to the lion's ancestors? Why had they disappeared? As if in answer, the lion let out another low growl, the sound resonating with the stones around them. Arden felt a sudden chill crawl down his spine. The ground began to tremble again, this time more violently, as though the very earth was waking up. The monument seemed to shift, its carvings glowing faintly, as if illuminated by some unseen force. The lion moved to the edge of the pool, its eyes never leaving Arden's. With a single fluid motion, it dipped its head toward the water. Arden followed its gaze, and to his shock, the surface of the pool began to ripple. The water shimmered, and the air seemed to thicken with energy. Slowly, the surface of the water began to clear, and an image began to emerge. An image of a lion, larger than any he had ever seen, its mane wild and flowing. The lion was standing atop a high cliff, its eyes glowing with an otherworldly light. Around it, the forest stretched as far as the eye could see, a sprawling, untamed wilderness that was as ancient as time itself. And then the image shifted. The lion's form blurred, and Arden saw the same creature, now older, its fur matted with age, lying at the foot of a massive stone altar. The image was faint, but there was no mistaking it. The lion had been the guardian of this land for centuries, but it had been wounded. Fatally, perhaps. The images blurred again, and Arden saw flashes of an ancient battle, of other creatures, monsters perhaps, rising from the earth, their eyes glowing with malice. The lion's ancestors had been defenders of something far more important than Arden had ever realized. They had kept a balance, a harmony between the natural world and the dark forces that lay beneath it. And now, with the passing of time, that balance had been broken. The sanctuary had been abandoned, its guardians lost, leaving only this last descendant, the lion that now stood before Arden. The realization hit Arden like a punch to the gut. He wasn't here by accident. The forest had brought him here for a reason. The lion was not just a creature of legend, it was part of something far greater. A legacy that had been passed down through generations, waiting for someone to continue the fight. The lion turned away from the pool and began to move toward the monument, its massive paws silent on the ground. Arden stood frozen, his heart racing. He could feel the weight of the moment, the gravity of the responsibility that was now his. He had come here seeking answers, but what he had found was far more than he had ever imagined. The lion paused at the monument, its head lowered as if in prayer. Arden watched in awe as the stone began to glow, its carvings lighting up with an ethereal energy. The earth trembled again, but this time the tremor felt like something else, something alive, something waiting. Without warning, the lion turned to Arden and began to move toward him. Its eyes were no longer filled with mystery or power, they were filled with a silent plea. It was asking for help. Arden's breath caught in his throat as he stepped forward, understanding that the lion's legacy was now his to bear. The battle was not over. The dark forces had not been vanquished, and the sanctuary's secrets had not been fully revealed. But Arden now knew what he had to do. The forest had chosen him, just as it had chosen the lion before him. He would become the new guardian, the one to protect this ancient land from the shadows that lurked beneath. The lion, once the king of this vast kingdom, had passed the torch, and Arden, though terrified and uncertain, knew that he could no longer turn away from his fate. With a final glance at the monument, the lion turned back toward the heart of the sanctuary, its massive form disappearing into the shadows. Arden followed, his resolve hardening with every step. He had become part of something far greater than he had ever imagined. The legacy of the lion, and the future of the forest, now rested in his hands. The deeper Arden ventured into the forest, following the lion's steady, powerful stride, the weight of the responsibility began to sink in. His mind raced, each thought an echo of the enormity of the task ahead. He had come here to study wildlife, to record the movements of creatures in their natural habitat, but now he was being thrust into something far beyond his understanding. The lion, its regal presence unwavering, led him into the very heart of the sanctuary, a place where time seemed to stand still. The forest around him felt ancient, untouched by the hands of humanity, as if it were a living testament to a world that had once existed in harmony, before the forces of darkness had stirred beneath its surface. The air grew heavier with each step, the atmosphere thick with a presence that Arden couldn't explain. He felt as though he was walking on the precipice of something monumental, something that had been hidden for eons, waiting for someone to awaken it. His pulse quickened, not from fear, but from the sheer magnitude of what he was about to face. The lion's legacy was no longer a distant myth. He was now part of it, bound to the land in ways he didn't yet comprehend. They arrived at a clearing where the trees parted to reveal an ancient stone circle. The stones were weathered by centuries of wind, rain, and time, but their carvings, intricate, deep, and mysterious, still held their shape. The lion paused at the center of the circle, its eyes fixated on the stones, as though sensing something Arden couldn't yet perceive. The air hummed with a faint energy, an ancient magic that seemed to pulse through the earth beneath their feet. Arden approached cautiously, his breath shallow, his every instinct telling him that this place was the heart of the sanctuary, the source of its power. He could feel the weight of countless generations of guardians, of lions who had protected this sacred ground. And now, The mantle had been passed to him. But what did that mean? What was he meant to do with this power, with this knowledge? The lion, sensing his hesitation, turned its gaze toward him, its eyes glowing with an almost knowing expression. A strange sensation washed over Arden, a feeling of connection to the forest, to the earth beneath him, and to the lion that stood before him. It was as though the very ground was speaking to him, urging him to understand. He knelt down beside the stones, tracing the ancient symbols with his fingers. They were the same as those on the monument, but more intricate, more detailed. There were no clear answers in the markings, just a cryptic message that seemed to be locked away, waiting for the right moment to be revealed. As Arden examined the stone circle, the forest seemed to grow still. The rustling of leaves ceased, and the distant calls of birds and animals fell silent. Even the wind, which had once swept through the trees with a soothing hum, stopped. It was as if the entire sanctuary was holding its breath. Then a low growl rumbled from the lion, sending a shiver down Arden's spine. The lion stepped forward, its massive paw resting upon the center stone. The ground trembled beneath Arden, and the air thickened, charged with an energy so powerful it almost knocked him off his feet. Arden's heart raced as he stumbled back, unsure of what was happening but unable to look away. The stones around them began to glow, faint lines of light emerging from the carvings, running like veins through the ancient rock. The lion's eyes locked onto Arden's, its gaze intense, unyielding. The energy surged, pulling Arden toward the center of the circle. His pulse quickened as he realized what was happening. The sanctuary was awakening, responding to the lion's presence, responding to him. The power was his to claim, but only if he embraced it fully. The ground beneath him cracked, and from the earth rose a shadow, an indistinct form at first, but slowly solidifying, growing in size and shape. Arden's breath caught in his throat as he realized what he was seeing. A massive, dark figure, a beast of shadows and twisted limbs rising from the very heart of the earth itself. It was unlike any creature he had ever seen. A nightmare made flesh, an ancient force that had been sealed away for centuries, awaiting its time to rise again. The lion let out a roar, sharp and powerful, echoing through the forest. The earth shook as the shadow beast, its eyes glowing with malice, locked onto the lion. It was a creature of darkness, an embodiment of the very forces the lion had fought to keep at bay for centuries. It was the reason the guardians had existed, the reason the lions had watched over the land, to prevent this ancient evil from rising. But now it was free. Arden's heart raced, his body trembling with a mix of fear and awe. The lion stood firm, unyielding, ready to face the darkness once again, but Arden knew that this time the battle would not be won by strength alone. The lion had already fought its war, and now it was passing the burden on to him. The legacy was not just about protecting the sanctuary. It was about protecting the world itself from the ancient evil that sought to consume it.